Hi.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, so just one question. So in your presentation, is there anything that has to do with like the terms and conditions of the awards? Like, are you going to touch base on that or okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
cover the criteria and things like that.
Okay,
Uh,
cool. So I don't have to.
yeah, it's all the
Awesome.
information that was on the slides Karina shared.
Oh, okay. Because she did mention that I should also like as an ending. Oh, but she mentioned if you don't get to cover everything, then I can just speak about the terms and conditions. But yeah,
Okay, cool.
hopefully. Yeah. But I think you'll think because I scheduled it for like I scheduled it for 1 to 3:15.
Hmm.
So I think that would be enough time.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Awesome. Alrighty then.
Um,
Hmm.
I guess if you're going to be around, would you just like yell at me if I missed someone asking a question in the chat or there's been a problem? Um,
Right. No problem. Yeah. I'll keep an eye on that on the chat. Yeah.
cool.
Cool. So another thing is that a part of this will also be live streamed or it's also live streamed. So there'll be others joining via the session itself and others on YouTube.
Okay, cool. Can you see, I guess, the YouTube comments and things?
Yes, I'm also going to keep an eye on that.
Oh, okay, cool. I guess if we get any interesting questions there, then we can take some of those
Yeah, awesome.
if we've got time.
So Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Writing Award-winning fact-checking report webinar. So what I'm going to do is allow at least 2 minutes for everyone, for others who are still joining us to join in, and then we'll get started from there. Okay, so again, welcome everyone to today's webinar on writing an award-winning fact-checking report hosted by Africa Check, the continent's first independent fact-checking organization. So I'm Bokamisa Matsawane, and I'm thrilled to have you join us this afternoon. In this session, you are going to learn from our researcher on how to create impactful fact-checking reports. You'll also gain insights on identifying reliable sources, verifying claims, and presenting your findings effectively. Whether you're an experienced journalist or new to the fact-checking scene, this webinar will provide valuable tools to enhance your skills and fight misinformation. I'm joined by my colleagues, Keegan Leach, who's a researcher at Africa Check and also the facilitator for this session, as well as Mabato Kwena, who is the project coordinator at Africa Check. So without further ado, let's get started. Please welcome our facilitator, Keegan Leach.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to just quickly share my screen so that you can see our presentation, and then we're going to jump right into it. I might miss some things that appear in the chat, and I can't see them all the time, but if you have questions as we're going, feel free to put them in the chat. And if they are urgent, then Bokamoso can let me know. But otherwise, during breaks in the presentations, we will pause and go through any questions that you have, and try and make sure that we don't leave any gaps. For now, hopefully you can all see my screen, and we're going to jump right into it. So the first part of this session is going to be about writing an award-winning fact-checking report. Hopefully, you are here because you've heard about our fact-checking awards, and you are a journalism student or a journalist or a working fact-checker who would like to enter. So this is going to cover the basics of how to write a fact check, the sort of structure that Africa Check uses, and we're going to tie into that some of the things that we're going to be looking for in award-winning submissions and award-worthy submissions. So let's get into it, and we're going to start off by just explaining the difference for those of you who are not familiar with between traditional journalism and fact checking, because there is a little bit of nuance and there is a little bit of a difference. And it's important to keep in mind when you are submitting to the awards. So for a start, journalists can quote anonymous sources. Obviously, if you are a journalist, you will make sure that those are trusted sources that you have vetted and who you are sure you can trust. You're not just going to quote any old person, but there are many times when you might want to quote a source who doesn't want to be named for fear of reprisals or doesn't feel safe or comfortable being open. And even though you've vetted them and you are sure that they're trustworthy, you're not going to put their name in your article. And fact checkers, on the other hand, can't. We can, because of the way that we work and our goals, only quote publicly available, reputable data or named sources and things like that. So if we quote someone because we want our sources to be available for anyone to view and anyone to check, then we require that they be someone who we can name and point to as, an expert in the field that we're discussing. If we quoted anonymous sources or unreleased private reports or something like that, then other people reading our fact checks wouldn't be able to go check that information for themselves. And that's why we limit ourselves to publicly available data. Journalists can also report on several aspects of a news event. They can go do on-the-ground reporting and cover, a whole bunch of different perspectives, delve into things that are maybe more opinion rather than fact-based. And that is useful and vital to journalistic reporting. But when it comes to fact-checking, the way that we do this is we choose a very specific claim or statement, and we focus on that. So if we are fact-checking a particular claim, then we limit ourselves to the facts dealt with in that claim, or the information that can be addressed with factual information, if that claim itself is not factual. So we are going to be a little bit strict in what we expect. You can't, for example, quote anonymous sources, go do first-hand reporting, and discuss something that is really a matter of opinion rather than fact. And we will cover in the following slides some of the reasons why that might be the case and why that might be important. Sorry, I was just checking the chat there quickly. That's something that hopefully you'll get a feel for as we go. But just as a heads up before we start, there are some differences between the two fields. So before we start talking about how we write our fact checks, there is a vital question that must be answered before you start any kind of fact-checking report. Can I actually fact-check this claim? This is sort of a step 0 in what we are going to call the 5-step fact check. And this ties into some of those differences that we just mentioned between fact-checking and journalism, because there are a lot of topics or a lot of claims and subjects that journalists might cover because they are important to public debate. They have some kind of relevance to what a journalist's audience might want to know and read about. But a fact checker isn't necessarily going to be able to cover them because they don't fall within our purview. And that purview is claims, specific claims that can be verified or proven using publicly available, credible organization. There are a couple of things that quite obviously can't be fact-checked. So opinion, for example, is not something that we can fact-check because there is no factual answer to that, no objective answer. If, for example, I said that Renaissance was Beyonce's best album, then that's not something that we can prove. We can't even prove from an outside perspective whether I believe that in my heart. If I said Renaissance was Beyonce's best-selling album, that's something that we could actually make a factual claim about, and that we could verify using, for example, sales data or streaming data or something like that. But when it comes to that kind of opinion, that's something that we just can't fact check. Similarly, claims about the future. If I said that, in the next 5 years, the world will go through another pandemic similar to the COVID pandemic, it's possible that that will happen, but none of us actually knows for certain. We're never going to have a definitive answer as to whether that prediction is right or wrong until we live out the next 5 years. And even when we have very reliable estimates or very reliable data-based predictions about what's going to happen in the future, those aren't necessarily going to come true. If I predict how much the South African population is going to grow in the next 5 years, or something similar to that, then it's possible that that could be correct. But none of us actually knows the answer for sure until we get there and we actually measure it. So those things are off limits. But the additional limitation to use only publicly available, credible information is also a slight restriction on what we can do. This means, like I've already said, that we can't quote anonymous sources. We can't use, say, scientific reports that haven't been released to the public. We rely on using information that anyone can access. And this is so that other people can check our work and see that we have come to an accurate conclusion. So things that can typically be fact-checked include things like historical data. This example, for instance, in 2017, rubber made up 65% of Liberia's exports. That's something that, whether this claim is true or not, it's likely that we can go check export data and historical records and find out whether that's true or not. Comparisons are similar. So this one here, the unemployment rate in Ethiopia is 4 times higher than in Kenya. And those are things that, because it's likely that data is collected on those topics, and that data is likely to be publicly available, we can go and check those things and compare between the two. We'll talk about some of the nuances in doing comparisons like this, because it's not necessarily always straightforward, but it is often the case that that can be fact-checked. Statistics, for a similar reason, because data is collected on topics like, health of children in Africa, we can typically find some kind of study or historical data or something like that that can either back this up or disprove it. And legality. Legality sometimes becomes a bit of a gray area. Sometimes the law is a matter of interpretation. So, in some cases, whether a law applies in a certain situation might depend on how a particular judge makes a ruling in a certain case, or what the other context is surrounding that case. But in this example, a 70-year-old can run for the office of the president in the Gambia, that's something that is likely to be quite set in stone and quite black and white. Either the Gambia has, age limits for its presidency or not, and if it does have age limits, we can go and check, do those age limits allow a 70-year-old to run? So these are often things that are quite easy and fall quite obviously into the purview of a fact checker. When it comes to submitting to the awards, you're going to need to go a little bit beyond this, because when we're looking for the best fact checks, we are going to be looking not just at whether they meet the criteria for fact checking, but at how relevant they are, how impactful they are, and where they're coming from. But we'll get into this in a little more detail later. We'll talk about sort of exactly what you should be aiming for. First, I'm going to pause quickly and let you take a look at this slide and just type in the chat which of these statements is fact checkable. The first is that South Africa's GDP will reach $450 billion by the end of this year, 2024. The second is that the official unemployment rate in South Africa is 47%. And third is that the South African government is doing the best it can to grow the South African economy. I'm not asking whether it's true or not, but just, are these statements fact checkable? And quickly type your answers in the chat. You can just put yes or no with the number, but if you have time, give a sentence or two explaining why you say what you do. Okay, getting lots of good answers. Lots of people have said that only the second claim here is fact checkable. Salim Sani has said that 2 and 3 can be fact checked, but 1 can't. Lots of people saying 1 is not checkable. Someone else, Basit Saneh, said that number 3 is fact checkable. A couple of other people seem to be saying that number 3 is fact checkable. Someone is not so sure. Sonwar Bile said that 1 and 2 can be fact checked, as they're backed by statistics and historical data. Not so sure about number 3. Mwangi also said that number 1 could be fact checked with the right stats. Okay, I'm going to go on and reveal the answers here. The answer is that only number 2 can be fact checked. So congratulations to everyone who answered that. There were a lot of people who I did see getting it right. Why is this the case? Well, number 1 can't be fact checked because it's a claim about the future. Remember how I said that even with very accurate predictions that are based on historical data and are quite reliable, we can't actually find out until we get there whether those predictions come true. South Africa could be on track to reach $450 billion GDP by the end of the year. All of the leading economists could be predicting that, and it could be a very reliable prediction, but an unexpected event like a pandemic or an unusual election result or something like that could change that. We could be right on track to hit that milestone all the way up until December of 2024, and suddenly there is some unexpected event which causes GDP to plummet, or there is some unexpected success which actually causes us to overshoot that milestone a great deal. Until we actually reach this date, the end of 2024, we can't prove this true or false. This second one, the official unemployment rate in South Africa is 47%. that is fact-checkable. We can go and compare this to what the official data is that's released by StatsSA and see whether they match. And you'll notice this, if you know the unemployment, you'll notice I've slightly overstated the official unemployment rate here. And this is higher than the actual one released by StatsSA. So it's a good example of how, it doesn't need to be true, it doesn't need to be false to qualify as fact-checkable. It just needs to be something about which there exists reliable, publicly available data for us to go and confirm it. The final one, a couple of people said they weren't unsure about this. Some people said this was definitely fact-checkable or definitely not fact-checkable. This is not fact-checkable because this is an opinion. We could all say that the South African government is doing the best it can to grow the South African economy, or we could say that it's not. But we're not all going to agree on what the best means. Some of us might think that doing the best it can should mean giving tax breaks to big businesses. Others might think it means supporting small local entrepreneurs. Some of us might think that, the government should be spending more or less money in certain areas. This is something that even if we can use data to support this argument, this is ultimately an argument based on opinion. We are all going to have different ideas about what the best means in this context. So it is something that if someone had made a specific claim to back this up, if someone had said the South African government is doing the best it can to grow the economy because it has invested X many billions in the public works program, then we could check whether it had made those investments, but we can't say whether those investments are really the best it could be doing. So hopefully, after these examples, you're getting a bit of an idea of what falls within a fact checker's ambit and what doesn't, because even though these kinds of questions and these kinds of claims might be very interesting for a journalist to discuss, they can't necessarily be proven or disproven. So with that sort of groundwork out of the way, we're going to explain the skeleton that Africa Check uses for fact-checking. And this changes a little bit depending on what we are doing and the kind of fact check that we're writing. But this sort of underlies all of the work that we do. And it's a great starting point if you are writing a fact check for the first time and you would like some guidance. It's called our 5-step fact checking process, and you can find some guides explaining it on our website, but we're going to go through it in quite a bit of detail here. We've already covered the first step, or the step 0 rather, which is, can I fact check this? But once you've found a claim and you're sure that you can fact check it, it is a factual statement, and it is the sort of thing about which you expect to find publicly available data. How do you actually go about verifying something? The first step here is identifying the source and verifying the context. This is, if it is a claim that was said by someone, typically about finding the exact wording of what they said. Could you please mute yourselves if you have not already? I will mute you if I see you pop up because your mic is off. But just if you notice that it is, please could you mute yourselves now? So what we're aiming to do here is find out exactly what was said and in what context. Are we quoting a person correctly? Exactly what words did they use? And we'll talk in a moment about why this is so important. But for now, laying the groundwork, we just want to find out what was said. If this came from a person, then the gold standard is to have video or audio evidence of what they said. Don't just rely on a transcript of a speech or secondhand reporting or something like that, because if someone releases a published transcript, they might actually go off script and vary from what they wrote or vary from what the transcript said when they're actually speaking out loud. A reporter who's reporting on an event might misquote someone through no fault of their own, just because they slightly misremembered a quote or something like that. And that's why audio or video is so important. If you can't find something like audio or video, and in general as good practice, then it's helpful to contact the person who made the claim or the organization who made the claim. Confirm with them whether they're being quoted correctly by secondhand sources, and ask them at the same time what their source was for this claim. If they do have a source, they're often very eager to share it with you to prove that they are accurate and they know their facts. And so this is a really helpful first step to take, even if you have found audio or video of exactly what they said. If you are checking an out-of-context image or video, then this is actually going to be the big focus of your fact check. You're going to track down the original context that the picture or video was shared in, and most of your fact check is going to be about explaining how you found that original context and explaining what the context actually was, why the new context it's being used in is misleading. We're going to explain this in the next session. There's there's two parts to this webinar, and we're going to explain some of the techniques and tools that you can use to track down the original context of a picture or video. For now, we're just going to note that sometimes this is really the bulk of a fact check. Other times, say you are checking a quote from a politician, well, you find their exact wording, if you can, ask them for their source, and then we move on to step 2, defining terms and contexts and concepts. I'm going to ask you another question in a moment, but first just to explain what this step is. This is about working out exactly what all the terms and the words mean in this context. This is especially important when a word might have an official or a scientific definition. There are very often words that have, say, legal meanings, which are distinct from the way that we use those words colloquially. And so it's very important to find out in what context is this being used and what does it mean in that context. Another important thing to check is whether the claim relates to a specific time frame or region or demographic. So a good example of why this might be important is when it comes to crime stats. It's very difficult with many crimes to make comparisons between countries because how those crimes are recorded depends partially on how the legal system in a country defines those crimes. And a classic example of this is sexual assault. It's very common to see comparisons between sexual assault rates in different countries, where the comparison says, country A has a sexual assault rate 10 times higher than country B. And what is really happening, and isn't totally obvious at first there, is that country B has a very narrow definition of what constitutes sexual assault. Country A has a broader definition and therefore records more things as a crime, even if more of those kinds of crimes aren't necessarily committed. So it is important to check carefully if you're comparing between timeframes when a definition might have changed, between countries where the two countries might use a different definition, things like that, that you have definitions for all of those contexts. Here is a quick example. And again, I'm going to pause and let you write into the chat, which of these terms and concepts would we have to define if we were checking this statement? Only 2 of every 10 children in Nigeria suffering from malnutrition are being treated. What terms and concepts would you have to be careful to define there? And I'll just let you write in the chat. Sorry, I accidentally moved to the next slide there. Hopefully that didn't give all the answers away. Lots of people immediately saying malnutrition. Storm says malnutrition and treatment. So what does it mean to be treated? Kanya also talking about treatment, and Akona. Lots of similar answers, malnutrition and treatment. Sonwabile brings up another interesting one, the ratio 2 in 10. How exactly that was recorded, maybe, whether it means 20% or whether it is a rounded off figure or something like that. Okay, lots of good answers. I think just about everyone has said malnutrition. Lots of people have also added treatment, and those are vital to define. Does this mean that the children have been diagnosed with malnutrition by a doctor, for example? What does treatment entail? And there's a couple of more that I've highlighted, but I actually think that you have covered the most important ones. One that we might want to think about is what a child is in this context. Is a child just someone who isn't a legal adult, who is under the age of 18? Does it mean under the age of 16? Does it mean someone who is not even a teenager yet? That might impact our definition or the way that we approach this. Suffering from malnutrition is the same as, a lot of you have said malnutrition. How is that diagnosed and defined? And what does treatment mean? Is there a certain level of treatment that they have to reach before we can consider them on treatment? Or does it mean any kind of attention from a medical professional or something like that? Some others that we might pick out, and I think Sonwabile pointed out 2 of every 10, could be a ratio that becomes very important. Learning how exactly that ratio is collected, or perhaps in what context does this apply to, 20% exactly of all Nigerian children, or does it only mostly apply in more limited demographic contexts? I might also define in Nigeria, does that just mean anyone living in the country at the time, or Nigerian citizens specifically? All of these things might impact our fact check, but you picked out the most important ones there. Once we've done this, we move on to step 3. This is where we finally start digging through data and inspecting the evidence using the latest reliable data. As we've already covered, we want to use credible, publicly available information here. We want to use data that is available to anyone who might want to go and check our work after we've published our report, so that we can show that, we are relying on things that are credible. We're not misquoting things. We're not misrepresenting the facts as they stand. The best tip that I have for you here is to build up a library of quickly accessible, reliable data sources, places that you can go to that publish credible information, that do accurate surveys and studies, and that you can trust for data on a particular topic. This library could just be a note that you keep in a Google document somewhere, where you just have a bunch of links to different organizations and the places that they publish regular reports or, data updates or something like that. One thing that you could do is check Africa Check's resources. We have a tool called InfoFinder, which is accessible to anyone, where we essentially do exactly this. We share data sources for data on different topics in countries around Africa. So if you wanted to find out information about education in Nigeria, you could go to InfoFinder and put in those 2 terms, and then we would share with you some of the sources that we go to when we need to discuss those topics. Similarly, our fact sheets, our guides, our other published materials will link to the data we've used in the past, so that you can go and check on it. A note, your library or Africa Check's library or any kind of library that you use might not be perfect. It might not be perfectly up to date all the time or always have the best source, but it is a great jumping off point. If you go to InfoFinder and you find, that the last time we updated it, we included the General Household Survey from StatsSA, and that was our reliable source for data about sanitation in South Africa. But we have included the 2022 survey, and there's a new one that's come out since then, which we haven't updated. At the very least, you have been pointed to a source that has been vetted in the past, that is known to be reliable, and then you can just check, has that source published more recent information than the last time this library was updated? This is the InfoFinder logo. You can just find it if you search Africa Check's website for InfoFinder, or just search for Africa Check InfoFinder. It should come up. I think it is at the URL africacheck.org/InfoFinder. It should be easy to find. Whatever kind of library or starting point you use, though, just try and keep a list of data sources that you know you can trust and that you have vetted, so that you don't need to go through the process of sort of checking the credibility of every new person or organization you quote every time you quote a new study or a new person. You have a list of reliable sources that you already know you can trust. Step 4, approach experts. We go to experts after we've already started picking up some information and some data about the topic that we're discussing, and we're starting to already get an idea of what we think about whether the claim is accurate or not, so that they can check our work. We can't be experts in everything ourselves, so we go to people who are actually experts, and then we ask them to check our work. There are a couple of things that you should ask when you approach an expert. Obviously, you can ask them, is the claim correct? But you can also ask them about the context. Ask them things like, what data sources should I consult? This is why we go to experts after we've already started to gather a bit of information, so that we can ask them, is this the latest reliable data? Are there any problems with the sources that I am quoting? Am I interpreting things correctly? Because we want to know that we haven't made some mistake in the way that we have gathered and discussed a piece of information or a claim. And then the final step is set out your evidence. So actually,
before you move on to the final step, there's a question here from Malwandle. Malwandle is asking if, oh, Linda, is it true that data published 10 years ago is considered stale?
That is a very good question. So in some cases, yes. If it is a claim about something that might change regularly, if it's a claim, for example, about unemployment, then 10-year-old data is definitely going to be stale. That kind of statistic is going to change a great deal depending on who is in power in a country. What events like the COVID pandemic, which massively impacted employment, things like that. If it is data about, say, how deadly a particular disease is, or something that is unlikely to change a great deal over 10 years, then that's not necessarily unreliable. Something like the lethality rates of a disease, or something like that. Usually this comes into play in the context of scientific studies. Then 10-year-old studies can still be useful and relevant, but you should always try and find more recent data. At the very least, if a study has been done more recently than that 10-year-old data, it might have looked at the results of that 10-year-old study and tried to fill in the gaps that it couldn't fill in at the time. So if it was about a disease, then new studies might have said, okay, last time we checked, whether the disease was responsive to these medications, new medications have been invented then, and new treatment methods and things like that. So if you can, try and find the most up-to-date data. And in a lot of contexts, 10 years is going to be too old to be really useful, but that isn't a general rule. There are plenty of cases where it might still help you.
Okay,
And
just before we move on
yeah,
again, just one last question. How do you fact check historical backgrounds that are not documented?
right. Okay. If something isn't documented, then there are times when we're just going to need to fall back on pointing out that that data is missing. So for example, if someone says, this happens a lot with claims comparing modern South Africa to apartheid South Africa. People will say, the unemployment rate is X now, and that's, I don't know, twice as high as it was in 1970. Very often, those time periods are incomparable. There were many people who were excluded from data collection under apartheid, and a lot of the ways that people were categorized, or that some of this demographic data was collected, means that it's just not comparable with what we're talking about when we talk about the population and the country today. So those are cases where essentially we have missing data from that period. In those cases, it's often enough to say this is not a comparison that we can make. That data doesn't exist, and so we can't totally disprove the claim, but we can point out how the claim is inaccurate or misleading, or it makes some major error. Because if, after all, there is no historical record for us to rely upon to verify a claim, then that means that the person making the claim doesn't actually have historical data on which to base that claim. Hopefully that's a helpful answer. So let's cover this final step, setting out your evidence, actually writing the fact check. This doesn't feel like a step in the research process, but when we think about our aims and our goals here, which are to be able to explain things to people clearly and comprehensively, so that even someone who hasn't spent potentially weeks like you might have reading about and learning about the topic can read your report and immediately understand what the conclusion is and why you've come to that conclusion. So this means explaining step by step what you have done, how you've reached a conclusion, every piece of data that you have relied upon, and how you have put it together to, actually verify what you're talking about. And it also means making your evidence available. If you are writing on the web, hyperlink to your sources so that someone with just one click can go and read where you're getting your evidence from. If you are not writing on the web, if you are, communicating through video or in a newspaper or something like that, then at the very least, cite your sources clearly enough that they are easy to find. And this is also the stage at which we inform the person we fact-checked of what we found. Ideally, if we're doing this step right, no one who reads our report should be able to disagree with us. Even the person that we have fact-checked should be able to see all of the evidence that we've laid out and see how clearly we have come to the conclusion and say, well, that's inarguable. This is correct. I was incorrect, or I was missing something. And hopefully it doesn't always happen, but ideally at this point they might correct themselves, because the way we have laid out our fact check is clear enough and comprehensive enough that there isn't room to disagree with what we found. As I say, if you've done everything well, anyone who reads your report should be able to understand the process you followed and agree with your verdict. They should be able to check all of your evidence, and it should be bulletproof. Hopefully, the person you have fact-checked will issue a correction. And this is relevant to the awards because if you can make some kind of impact, if you can get someone to retract an incorrect statement, or you can get them to acknowledge your corrections, then that's really great impact. A final thing to keep in mind, there are some times when you will need to update your report. Hopefully, you have been thorough and you have been totally accurate, but if you have made a mistake, then you should set a good example to other people by correcting yourself when that mistake is pointed out to you. So if you realize after you've published something that you have made a mistake, then update your report, reflect that, correct the information that was erroneous. And even if you haven't made a mistake, there are some cases where an update might be important. For example, if at the time that you publish a fact check, you find a certain thing, a good example of this is early in the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization advised that people didn't need to wear masks. They didn't believe that COVID-19 spread in a way that masks would prevent. And so they advised people not to purchase or wear masks and just to leave those resources to medical professionals. Later on, that changed. Obviously, masks became a strong recommendation or a requirement, and so the advice of public health organizations changed. Early on, we had published reports debunking claims that everyone should be wearing masks, and writing that public health organizations advise you don't need to wear a mask, take these other precautionary measures. In those cases, even though what we had written was correct at the time, we went back and updated those reports so someone looking for information in the future wouldn't be misled and wouldn't read that outdated information and believe that public health organizations were still advising that people don't wear masks. So there are cases where, your fact check was bulletproof, you hadn't made any mistakes, and you would still need to update a report just to communicate information, new information that might be important. We give all of our reports verdicts. You don't need to use these particular verdicts, and different fact-checking organizations all around the world use different kinds of rating systems. The idea behind these verdicts is just to give people a very quick idea of what we found. If they don't read the whole fact check and they just want to skim it, then hopefully just this word or this phrase at the start in our headline or very clear on the page will make sure that they don't come away with an incorrect impression of what we have found. And like I say, you don't need to use these, but our verdicts have been chosen so that we have a range of answers from something that is outright correct or incorrect to something that, say, includes some accurate information but presented in a misleading way, or which is unproven, which we can't verify or debunk, but which we have pointed out, for example, that no data exists on a topic. Ideally, you shouldn't need to update these verdicts, even if you update your report. If your report was correct and the verdict was correct based on the best available information at the time, then you can keep that verdict as is, even if later information changes the situation. A comment on the awards now and how you might sort of tailor your approach to submitting to the African Fact-Checking Awards. What is the awards? Well, it is an awards program that we run, which is open to journalists, students, and working fact-checkers in Africa, working in Africa. There are prizes for those separate categories, so student journalists, professional fact-checkers, and working journalists. And there are a couple of limitations. First, I hope you take note that entries for the awards close on the 14th of July this year. But as I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of things that we are going to be specifically looking out for. We want to know that your fact check exposes a claim that is misleading or incorrect. And so even though we have ratings that include correct and mostly correct, in the case of the awards, we want to know that you're debunking something. Did the claim originate in Africa, or is it relevant to Africa? Obviously, as the African fact-checking awards, we want that to be important. It doesn't need to come from, say, an African politician or public figure or something like that. But if it's relevant to the continent, then we will consider that. And is it published by a media or independent fact-checking organization in Africa? This is relevant for fact checkers and working journalists. If you are a student, we will consider anything published in student publications or a personal blog or something like that. But if you are a working journalist, then publishing in, say, the New York Times isn't really going to qualify. It needs to be an African fact-checking organization or media organization. There are a couple of things that we are specifically going to look out for. These are not requirements, but these are good for keeping in mind because this is how we're going to judge the submissions we receive. We're going to look at significance. How much does the topic matter to society at large? We call this the so what factor. Why is it important that you've debunked this piece of misinformation? How serious could the consequences be if the claim wasn't fact-checked? Something that is maybe an obvious silly joke that people were unlikely to believe and would not cause much harm if they did believe it is not going to be as impactful or as important as something that might have serious consequences for the political landscape in a country or the personal health of the people who believe it. Testing, how thoroughly did you test the claim against the available evidence? Did you use publicly available, credible evidence? And were you fair in your testing? Did you actually make an effort to seek out the best evidence and assess the claim in a thorough and accurate way? Presentation, this is that fifth step of the five-step fact check. How well do you present your evidence? Have you structured your report in a way that anyone can clearly understand the evidence that you used, how you cited each source, and why it led you to your final verdict? And impact. This is, as I talked about, things like whether your report led to a correction. Did it have some kind of impact on the public debate? Did the person who you were fact-checking correct themselves? And what was the reach? Did lots of people read and share it? Did it get republished and reach a wide audience? Because even if you are doing the most important debunking in the world, unless you can get people to read it and act on it, correct themselves, or spread the accurate information instead of the inaccurate information, then your fact check is not going to have the effect that we want it to, which is actually providing people with reliable information. So these are things that are helpful to keep in mind when you are submitting to the awards in terms of choosing what sorts of claims you're fact checking and what reports and fact checks you submit to us. If you want to find out more, you can visit this webpage and read a little bit more about the entry requirements and the evaluation criteria. But this is sort of the end of this section of the presentation. I'm going to pause. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to step out for just 2 minutes. When I get back, I'm going to respond to any questions in the chat. So if you have questions about the awards, now is the time to ask them, and we will cover those. But in the next session, we are going to talk about how to do a fact check, how to verify information, how to verify images and video, and how to search for data online. So things that might help you in your fact-checking process. Excuse me for a moment. I will be back in 2 minutes to answer questions from the chat, and then we will continue.
That's fine. Thank you, Keegan.
Thank you very much for the short break. I'm going to go through the chat questions now. And we're going to cover just anything that might be important about the awards. So let me see what is new. I see that Mabato has been answering questions and helping out. I'm going to leave most of those questions if she has answered them.
Just a quick one, Keegan.
Yes.
Salma here, I was actually still typing, but Salma here asked a very important question with the awards categories. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you can enter more than one, or you can submit more than one claim or one report, right?
I think it depends on the category, but I think you can.
You
I think
can.
you
And then the next question Salma wanted to find out is, so Salma is a I'm assuming it's a she, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are
a
or she
journalist,
is she's a
fact checker,
journalist. She
and
also is. So I wanted to, as I was typing, I was going to say that you can only enter into one category, but however, in that category that you've entered, you can submit more than one application.
yes, I believe
Yes.
it double check. It might depend on the
Yeah.
category, but I believe that's the case.
Yeah,
Yes.
because you can't, as a professional fact checker, you can't apply for the professional and then apply again as a working journalist.
Yeah, I think that's the case. So you would need to apply for a specific category. I see that Ruwaida has asked, I suppose, a related question. Can more than one journalist participate from the same organization? And absolutely yes. Multiple people from the same organization or students at the same university or anything like that can enter the awards. There's no restrictions on how many different journalists can enter from a particular organization. So absolutely. Someone has. Oh yes, I was going to read the question about.
Let me leave the questions to you.
Is it compulsory that your fact-checking work be published by another media if you are a student journalist? We are a little bit more lenient for student journalists, so it doesn't need to be published in a newspaper or magazine or something like that, but it needs to be published somewhere. For students, we allow that somewhere to be a personal blog or a student publication, but it does need to be somewhere. It can't just be something that you have shared on your personal social media page or that you have written and submitted to us without publishing it on the web somewhere. It does need to be some kind of media, even if that is your own personal blog. I don't see other questions here that we haven't answered yet. Oh, someone asked, are the awards limited to fact-checking reports, or would a traditional news article in which a journalist contacts the interested parties for their comments also be accepted? This was Storm asking this. It does need to be a fact check. So it can be published in a traditional newspaper or some other traditional media outlet, but it does need to be a fact check that addresses a specific claim and comes to a specific verdict on it. It can't just be a general article which discusses a claim. So that is an important thing to consider. And then I see further back than that were the questions about the fact-checking process. Okay, I'm going to take Sonobile's question and then we're going to move on to the next part of this presentation. If there are different categories, I assume we're not graded the same, e.g. will a student journalist be graded the same way as professional fact-checkers or professional journalist? No, those are different categories for a reason. We are going to take into account the slightly different contexts in which all of these people work. And so, for example, a student journalist is not going to face exactly the same criteria as a professional fact checker. But presumably you do work in one of these fields, or you study or something like that. And so just choose the category that actually applies best to you when you're making your submission. The criteria, even though they're not going to be exactly the same, will be similar, and we're still going to be looking for things like impact and the reach of the fact check, the robustness of the report that you have written and how you've laid your evidence out. And even though the criteria will be slightly different, those broad approaches are going to be the same. Can you please put the link up to the entry of the competition? I hope that Bokamoso or someone has that handy. Mabato, okay. Okay, Mabato will add the link and you can use that to enter. All right. I am going to stop taking questions for this section now, and we're going to move on to some of the information about how to do things like verify a video and find out in what context and where and when a video or image was taken. All right. Hopefully you should once again be able to see my presentation. Oh, hang on. I'm going to need to reshare this new presentation. There we go. And we're going to get stuck in. As usual, if you have any questions that come up while I'm talking, then you can feel free to put those in the chat. If they're urgent, Bokomoso or Mabato will, let me know and I can pause and answer them. But otherwise, we'll just take a couple of breaks as we go and answer questions that have come up. This is going to cover image and video verification, and we're going to speak quite broadly. So we're going to talk about verifying contexts for claims that you might see on social media or in the public eye, just in general. But there is going to be a strong focus on images and videos and how you can place them in context and confirm that they're accurate. So the most important lesson I want you to take away from this session is that techniques are more important than tools. We're going to cover some specific technical tools and how to use them in a little bit of detail. We're not going to go very in depth. But more important than that, I want you to think about and remember how we are approaching these problems. The lessons to take away are to think out of the box, ask how something would have been shared when you're trying to track down the original context. And sometimes what you're going to be looking for is the context that information was shared in rather than the information itself. So thinking about those kinds of approaches and the techniques that we use to solve these problems is very important. And if you remember those and don't remember every single tool that comes up, then I think that you are going to have taken away the most useful information from this presentation. So how do you go about verifying where and when an image or video was shared? There are lots of context clues that you can use. And a good first example to start with is language. This is a claim that was made in a tweet several years ago. It showed a video of a burning building and the warning that this building was in the Joburg CBD on Brea Street. And it wasn't true. This video was from several years before. It had been taken in an entirely different country. And there were some immediate giveaways in the video because we could see the street signs were written, not all of them, but many of them in Hindi. Can someone mute yourself? Someone who is speaking. I'm going to mute you. All right. If you know Joburg, then obviously there are lots of languages spoken there. You might see writing in many languages, but something like an area with lots and lots of street signs in Hindi would be very unusual. Most of the signage in the Joburg CBD is written in English, and the few signs that are written in other languages are most likely to be in other South African languages. So it is a good, obvious starting point. But there are lots of other kinds of context clues that you can pick out in an image or video to find out where and when something was taken. Here's one that I'm going to ask you about as an example. So please, could you type in the chat what kinds of details you would pick out from this image to answer the question, was this taken in Kenya or Nigeria? And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to type in the chat. You don't need to have an answer to the question, but pick out the details in the image that might give you an answer if you were to spend some time looking them up. First answer from Sonobile, who says number plates. I'm sorry if they're a bit hard to make out, but lots of other people are saying the registration plates and the number plates. Chris has an answer. Chris thinks that this was taken in Kenya. Chris, maybe you can tell us what gives that away for you. Mwangi has said the landscape, and David as well has said the vegetation and the landscape. So you're right, those things might be clues that you could use. I don't know if there's anything else that stands out. Scenery and number plates, says Neo. There is a big one that no one has mentioned just yet. Okay, I don't see it coming up. So, oh, Sonobile says types of vehicles, which might actually be quite relevant. You know, the same sorts of vehicles are sold all over the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that different places all drive exactly the same cars. Some cars are more common in some countries than others. Vehicle regulations might be something that we could pick out, although not everyone in a country will follow the regulations. I think Kerper says the line used, presumably you mean the lines on the road, the street markings, and that is a really, and Chris has also said road markings, that is a really big clue here. And the one that I was hoping someone would point out, and Pritish has, is the direction, the side that the driver is seated and the direction in which they're driving. So that is actually a dead giveaway here, because these two different countries drive on opposite sides of the road. So you can look up road in Nigeria, road in Kenya, and double check. But this is an immediate giveaway. And the markings on the road markings are also very helpful. The types of vehicles might be relevant, the license plates, because even if we can't make out the exact details of the license plates, being able to see the license plate format can give things away for us. But the direction, the side of the road that the cars are driving on is actually a very quick, easy to confirm giveaway as to which country this was taken in. And congratulations to Chris, who said this was taken in Kenya. Some other things that you could look out for, we've mentioned things like road markings, license plates, the side of the road that you drive on, but there are many other details that you can pick out. In this photograph, we can even see flags. You might recognize the Ghanaian flag, which is on all of these street poles and on that billboard in the background. But even if you didn't recognize the flag itself, knowing that this is a country where they drive on the right-hand side of the road and they have a flag which is red, yellow, and green, and you might be able to see details like the MTN advert, which shows that MTN probably operates here. These details, when you start to put them all together, can very quickly help you narrow down the place that an image was taken. Even things like buildings and landmarks in the background. This is a very distinctive building. I have given this talk or this example to someone from Ghana who just said, "Oh, I recognize that highway." Anyone who lived in the country would probably recognize this because it's quite a distinctive place. So all of those can be details that give away where something was taken, and you don't need to know all of them exactly. You don't need to, for example, recognize a flag or just have memorized which side of the road every country drives on. These are things that are relatively easy to look up, and when put together with the other context clues in the image, can very quickly narrow down the location. Some other context clues. I liked during COVID being able to see whether everyone was wearing a mask, because if they were, that's a good sign that it was taken during the pandemic. And if they weren't, that was a red flag to check whether this was an older photo or video. Uniforms and clothing, something like a police or military uniform, that's very easy to look up online, actually, and can give away which country, at the very least, that person comes from. What's the weather like? You can track down exactly when something was taken if you know the weather records in that place. But even just knowing, well, it looks very hot there, so this probably wasn't taken during the winter time, can be helpful. What do street signs look like? If you can make out, names on a street sign, then that's very helpful. But even if you can't make out names, the format of a street sign is going to change from country to country. And knowing the format of the sign can be one of those things that lets you narrow down the location. Landmarks, buildings, business names, things like that can all be helpful clues to help you narrow down something. One thing that I would like to say, that not everything is obvious. If I were to ask you where this picture was taken, very quickly in the chat, could you tell me what your answer might be? And you don't need to justify it very hard. Just let me know what you think. What you think based on this image. Sorry, I think I skipped to the next page while opening the chat to have a look there. Storm says Florida, David says Japan. Interesting answers. Neo says China. Lillian says Thailand. These are really good answers. And I like that we have a bit of a diversity of answers. And I think I know why some of you have given those answers, even if you haven't said. So the writing is a pretty obvious clue that we could use here. And this is Chinese writing, but Thailand and Japan are countries where the same script is used. In Thailand, because Chinese is spoken there. In Japan, because Japanese uses the same characters, at least in one of its alphabets. Pritish guesses Malaysia. I suppose anywhere in sort of Southeast Asia, it's possible that you might see Chinese, even if it's not in China specifically. I'm guessing that Storm might have said Florida because of this sign here, which says Main Street to FL. And that is a good example of looking a little bit more closely at other details in the image than just the obvious ones. This wasn't taken in China. This was taken in New York. So not Florida exactly. That FL stands for Flushings, which is an area in Queens. Oh, sorry. And that is in Brooklyn, New York. But there are a couple of other details that I've highlighted here that are giveaways. So you can see several US flags in the background, 2 on that building over there and a 3rd over there. I wouldn't necessarily have expected you to spot some of these small details, from this image. You're not able to zoom in, like I've cropped in here. But it is an example of how you should look more closely than just the most obvious details in an image. If we look closely at this bus stop sign here, we'll notice that the bus stop and street sign there are written in English. which would be unusual in China or Japan or another Southeast Asian country. The bus signs match the New York bus signs. And this building in the back, this is not a detail from the image, but it's a screenshot from Google Street View, which just shows that this building in the back, this very distinctive one, is the Queen's Library in Queens. So this is something that is a good example because the obvious details are misleading. If I were trying to trick you about where this was taken, I wouldn't tell you, or I would tell you something like this was taken in China. And I would expect you to notice the Chinese script, and I would expect you to let that mislead you into guessing incorrectly. So good job. There were a lot of sort of answers from different places and a lot of people who seem to pick out some of those small details, even though I don't expect you to see all of the little ones that I picked out. And it is a good reminder not to just look at the first most obvious detail in an image and base your answer on that. Try to look for lots of smaller details that back each other up and confirm definitively where something was taken. In this case, you could even use things like the phone numbers that are visible on these signs and the street signs. And you could look up addresses. When it comes to verifying information on social media, one of the ways that you can approach this is to look first at the source. In fact, you should always be checking the source of any information. But when it comes to looking at social media sources, just finding out where a piece of information came from can be enough to debunk it, even when you aren't sure of, exactly when the pictures were taken or where they were taken or something like that. Here is a good example. This is a Twitter account over here that is imitating the Namibian, Namibia's largest newspaper. It was posted just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it claims that the then president of Namibia, he has since died, was going to send Namibian troops to help Ukraine. How might we go about vetting this? Well, we want to check things like the name and account handle. You'll notice that this account, in comparison with the real Namibian Twitter account, doesn't capitalize the N in Namibian. The handle there is not @ the Namibian, which is the real handle, but the Namibia News SL, which is pretty unusual. And these are things that you can check by going to the Namibian's website and seeing what Twitter account does it link to there. That's a pretty good way of checking that you have the right Twitter account and comparing things like the formatting of its name and the handle underneath it. Not all of them are going to be as obvious as this. A common tactic is to substitute letters for other letters that look similar. So instead of the Namibian News SL, it might have substituted an I for a capital I for a lowercase l, or swapped out an N for an M or something like that, where they're very close letters and they look very similar, or maybe like a number has been swapped in for a letter, and they're not going to stand out as obviously. So it's always worth being quite careful. But even if we don't have the actual trustworthy account to compare to, there are details that we can always look for that might give away that something isn't trustworthy. A good example is spelling and grammar mistakes, and especially if a source is pretending to be a news source, a professional news outlet, then formatting can also be important. Asking ourselves questions like, does the Namibian, the newspaper, tend to use emojis in its tweets? Does it format Hage G Geingob in this way? Because I think the real organization puts a period after the G. And just small grammatical details. He further stated that if you are a working journalist or a journalism student, you would probably know that your copy editor would tell you off for formatting that was clumsy and as grammatically awkward as he further stated that. A real news organization has a style guide, which it will follow quite strictly, and it will, although it can make mistakes, spelling and grammar mistakes, it has copy editors and things that will try and keep it consistent with that style guide, and avoid things like he further stated that. One other thing that you can do is just check who else is sharing the claim. If an African leader were sending African troops to go fight in a European country, that would be a pretty big deal. That would be a more newsworthy story than just a single newspaper sharing the information. So even if you don't spot any errors in the tweet itself and you don't know what the actual source is to compare it to, and you can't see any issue with things like the formatting of the name and the handle of the account that you're looking at, you can just look for this information and see if it has been shared by sources you recognize, if other news outlets are sharing it, and if reputable sources have said the same thing. If they haven't, that is a good sign that you shouldn't trust this. It's coming from one account that you can't confirm is the real account and that you can't trust. And that's a good way to check for yourself that maybe this isn't a reliable source. I'm going to ask you another question again. In this example, this is a screenshot of a breaking news announcement on Facebook, I think, that 7 coronavirus victims in Rwanda have been shot dead by unknown gunmen. So, what red flags could you pick out? What things stand out to you here as reasons to check whether this is an accurate source or reasons to maybe not trust this screenshot? And I'm going to check the chat while you have a few minutes to submit answers. Sorry, I realize I was speaking while muted there. A couple of people have said that this account isn't verified, which is a good giveaway. Accounts can be verified as official on Facebook. Used to be that they could be verified as official on Twitter, but obviously now anyone can pay for verification on Twitter. It's not necessarily a good indicator, but on Facebook, a verified account is still reliable. Someone has said that the picture looks irrelevant to the claim. It's just a picture of Paul Kagame. Salim has pointed out that there's a grammatical error here. A couple more people have pointed out the verification issue. I don't know if there are any other details that we can pick out before we go on to the answers. Pritish has pointed out something really fun, the 2 exclamation marks. I'm sure if any of you are working journalists, again, your copy editor would probably try and kill you if you submitted copy with something like 2 exclamation marks. That is over sensationalized. It's very unlikely that an organization like the BBC would include in their style guide formatting like the double exclamation mark. Tabelo has pointed out that their style guide might not use the digit 7. It might spell out the word 7. And so that is something that might seem a little unprofessional and that we could recognize as a bit unprofessional, as well as the grammar in the post. And Nelly Siwe has pointed out there's no link leading to the full story. If this were shared with us as a link, then we could go and verify it. But because this is just a screenshot with no link and no citation that we could follow to check if it's real, that should set off a red flag that maybe someone's just been careless and they've forgotten to share a link, but maybe they aren't sharing a link because there isn't a real link that we could go and verify. And these are great answers, all of them. You've all pointed out things that are really good examples of red flags. I don't think that there's much I really need to go over, except there is one extra that I would point out, this weird bar at the bottom of the image. This is because someone has taken a screenshot of a real BBC News article and edited it. They've put false text on it, and they've put a different photo over the screenshot, but they haven't completely covered up what was there before. So that bar at the bottom, you can see, matches the image on this real BBC News post, which demonstrates to us that this wasn't a real BBC News post. This was a BBC post that has been edited and where the details have been changed to mislead us. So you all picked out really good things. One more red flag, which is maybe not as big of a giveaway as things like the unprofessional formatting and the grammar and the sort of the other issues here, is this 36 minutes ago. This screenshot here has the exact date, March 17th. This one here makes it very difficult to find the original post that was edited. So it makes it difficult for us to find an original source. And whenever something is shared without that context that lets you know where and when it came from, it should just set off like a little bit of a spider sense for you to track down the original and not trust what you're seeing. A lot of people pointed out the verification issue. There isn't a verification check mark. That isn't always reliable. You can see that this actual post doesn't show a verification check mark on the account, even though it did come from the real BBC News account. And especially in African countries, it tends to be the case that a lot of official accounts aren't verified. There are government accounts or government departments and public figures who aren't verified. And often that's just because these social media companies are based in the United States or other Western countries. And so they make a lot more of an effort to verify organizations from those countries. And African politicians and public figures don't get the same treatment. So a verification check mark can be a very good red flag to look for, but it shouldn't be your only piece of evidence. And you should ideally try and find the original context or the original content to confirm whether something was real or whether it's been edited or something like that. One additional tip when you are on social media, and this is sort of the only time that you will be advised to read the comments, is read the comments. Don't trust the comments, but read them in case other people have already done your work for you. In this example that I showed you earlier, this video, when we were tagged in the video and asked to fact check it, there were already people in the comments who had pointed out to the original poster that this was out of context, that this was an old video, it wasn't taken in Joburg, and some people had even shared sources for the original video. We say read the comments, but don't trust the comments because these aren't always reliable. Sometimes these people are themselves misled. They are quoting older versions of a false claim or slightly different versions of a false claim. And this is evidence that at the very least, this claim is older than it appears to be, and there is some missing context here. but it is always possible that these people have been themselves misled. And so even if it's a good start, you should always go and double check the information that is shared by other users online. Don't just trust it. Now we're going to move on to some verification tools. There are lots of things that you can do by just picking out details or looking for context, but sometimes you want to just use a tool that cuts right to the chase and lets you very quickly check whether an image has been posted before or whether it seems to be altered or something like that. We're first going to talk about reverse image searches, which some of you might be familiar with already. We're going to discuss Google Images, Google Reverse Image Search in particular, but I advise you to check out other reverse image search tools and see how they give slightly different results. So Bing has a reverse image search. TinEye is a search engine that is built specifically for reverse image search. And then other search engines like Yandex and Baidu and things, they have reverse image search functions built into them, and they give slightly different results. So if one of these isn't working out for you and isn't giving you the results you need, try one of the others and see if the different results are more helpful. And then we're going to talk about general tools for verifying images and videos. The one that I am going to mention most heavily is called InVid. It is a browser extension for Google Chrome. And we're going to touch on them very briefly, but I bring them up now because I want to encourage you to check them out in your own time. We are unfortunately not going to have time to cover them in great detail right now. So, reverse image search. I'm going to show you an example of one in a moment. This is a way of searching the internet by providing an image as content to search for instead of providing text. If you have done a reverse image search before, you've probably heard of Google reverse image search, or Google Lens as it is now called, but there are lots of other alternatives, and some are good at different things. One that I think is particularly worth pointing out is TinEye. TinEye has a much smaller database of results than Google or Bing or Yandex or something. But TinEye, its database is built out of mostly stock photos, newswire photos, and things like that. So whereas Google will find images from social media, if you think that what you're looking at has likely been posted by a news organization or a stock photo site or something like that, then TinEye can often give you those results much better and much quicker without a lot of extra clutter from, say, Twitter and Facebook. I'll also mention that Yandex, because it is a Russian search engine, and and Baidu, because it is a Chinese search engine, are more likely to give you results from Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, respectively. So those are good if you just think that an image might have been posted in a particular context. Some other image verification tools, and most of these we are just not going to have time to cover. Forensically is a free browser-based tool that you can use. It does take a little bit of technical knowledge, but it's quite powerful if you are trying to determine whether an image has been manipulated using Photoshop or a similar technology. Media verification is a tool that does very much the same thing, but has some tutorials built in on how to use it. And InVid, the verification plugin for Chrome, is one that actually bundles all of these functions together. It's very powerful, and it has a lot of tutorials that you can follow in your own time. You can also use non-browser-based tools, and that includes things like ordinary image editing software and the image viewing software that might have come with your operating system. But we're not going to cover those in detail either. Let's do a quick demonstration. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that I can swap over to Google Images. And you can see how to do a reverse image search. So what we're going to look at here is this photograph. It supposedly is a picture that shows false ID documents manufactured by the EFF so that foreigners could vote in the upcoming national elections. We're going to find out if this is true, and we're going to do this not by looking for details in the image or trying to pick out context clues and things like that, but just by doing a reverse image search and checking if this picture has appeared on the internet before. We're going to use Google reverse image search. If you go to google.com/images or images.google.com, then you will see this screen here. And it also works on a phone. If you have a smartphone, you can use the Google Lens function, which I think is built into the Google app, but might also have a standalone app. But on a browser, you will see this little icon in the search bar. It is like a little camera icon. If you hover over it, it says search by image. And if you click on it, this little box will come up. If the image is hosted on the internet, you can copy a link to that image and paste it in here. Or if you have downloaded an image as we have, then you can just drag and drop it into this little box. I'm going to take this image that we've downloaded. I'm going to drag it and drop it into that box. Google will think for a few seconds, and then we will see this screen over here. Now, there's a lot going on. I'm going to point out the most important parts. First of all, you will notice that you don't just need to search for the image. You can also transcribe text in the image or translate that text with these functions down here, which can be useful if you quickly need to translate something that you see on the internet that's in a language you can't speak or read. For our purposes, though, that's not really important. What is most important is the results. On the right here, Google has tried to bring up images that are similar to this one. And there are a couple that are identical to this one. So some of these images are very different. They also include pictures of documents lying on the floor, but they're very obviously not the thing we're looking for. We can ignore those. They might be useful in some contexts, but for us, we're trying to find out if this exact image has appeared somewhere before. To do that, we can either click on Find Image Source, or Google has now put See Exact Matches under the first result here. If we click on that, we get a list of places where this exact image has appeared online before. And there's a couple of helpful things here. We can see the date that each of these things was posted. So if we're looking for the oldest version of this image, that makes it very easy to track down. We can see the source of the image. So, was it on News 24? Did it appear on X? Was it on The Citizen? And that helps us verify whether, or at least judge whether these are reliable sources. We're maybe not going to check the X post because that's less likely to be reliable than a News 24 post. And we just get a little preview to show us that, yes, this is the same image. In this case, we're going to click on a good example might be this Citizen article, because that is a news organization. This is a relatively old version of the image. It wasn't posted this year. It was posted in 2022. And we'll see what it tells us. In this case, when we click over and read the full article, what we see is that this was a man who was arrested for selling fake documents, not just IDs, but driver's licenses and bank cards and all sorts of things from his flat in Hillbrow. The full article makes it clear that, this has nothing to do with trying to swing an election. This has nothing to do with any particular political party. This person was selling these documents, presumably just to make money. So we have very quickly narrowed down exactly what we are looking at. We found the original context that this was shared in. We have found it shared by reliable sources, and we have the actual information about what is going on here. And that is typically what you're looking for from a reverse image search. The final tip I'll give you is if you want to search for only a part of this image, you could crop the image yourself with some image editing software, or Google lets you drag which sections of the image you're searching. You can adjust this box to just focus on a specific detail in the image and just look for that detail. But that wasn't relevant to our example here. I'm going to switch back to our presentation quickly. And I'm checking the chat at the same time. I don't know what question Mishali is asking about. So like Mabato says, please just enter the question in the chat again. If Mishali, if you meant your question about whether this presentation is being recorded, then yes, it is live on YouTube and the recording should be up on YouTube afterwards. All right, let's go back to the presentation. So we have used a reverse image search to find the context behind this picture. I just have these slides here for in case that doesn't work. But you can also review this afterwards to just find the exact URL that we used and things like that. And yes, it was out of context. That is how reverse image search works, and it can be a very quick way of getting the original context that a photo was shared in. What about when we're looking at video? Well, there is no reverse video search. There isn't a similar thing where we can just drag and drop a video or put in a video URL and immediately search for other videos that match it. But we can imitate this by doing a reverse image search. Every video shared online has a thumbnail, which is an image which shows you a preview of what is in that video, some idea of what to expect when you click play. And those thumbnails turn up in reverse image search. So if we can extract a thumbnail by taking a screenshot of it or taking a frame from the video and then doing a reverse image search for that thumbnail, we can very often find more examples of that same video. InVid actually has a function that has this built in. So if you download the InVid browser extension, you can very quickly and easily do this automatically. But you can do this in a very basic way by just taking a screenshot on your computer. Someone has got their mic unmuted again. Would you please?
No.
I'm going to mute you, Chris. This is a quick example. I'm not going to play the full video, but I'm just going to run you through the process of how this works. This is a video that, it's obviously been recorded from somewhere else and posted somewhere and then reposted to YouTube.
I want materials to make them.
But it is a video that supposedly shows a zombie waking up in a morgue in China. If we want to find the original version of this video, or even just more versions of this video, a really simple way to do this is to find a single frame from the video. So I have taken this screenshot by just taking a screenshot with my computer. And I have cropped out all of the unnecessary stuff. I've cropped out this caption. I've cropped out the extra sidebars that appear in YouTube. And all of those other details, just down to the part of the video that we want to look for. And I've put that into Google reverse image search. And we see the same sort of interface that came up previously. And we see a bunch of other videos that Google thinks looks similar. In this case, when we did this search, we actually found more examples of exactly the same video. And we found clearer examples where we could make out details in the video much better. And we even found examples of people debunking the claim. saying that, this was not a zombie waking up in China. It turned out to be part of an advert for a Russian TV show. So that is a way to essentially do reverse video search by doing reverse image search online. Other video tips are save or archive everything that you can. If you can't archive something yourself, there is a service called a Video Vault. It's designed for journalists who might be covering footage that may be violent and is likely to be taken down off of platforms like YouTube for showing sort of violence or gore or something like that. They will let registered users save videos so that they can always be accessed, even if, say, YouTube removes those videos. You can also use something like Amnesty International's YouTube Data Viewer, which will show you data about a YouTube video when it was uploaded, information about the channel that uploaded it, and other details about the video, like its length and its video quality and things like that. The final video tip I have is find as many versions of a video as possible. Even if this little trick here only finds you versions of a video that are a second longer or slightly clearer or something like that, try and hang on to those different versions of the video. If that extra second of footage pans across to show a street sign that gives away where the video was filmed, or if that video is slightly clearer and crisper and you can make out more details in it, then having another version of that video is a new tool in your toolbox that you can use to look for details to confirm the context in which it was taken. A final aside when it comes to videos and images have metadata embedded in them. This means data about where and when the video was taken. This data gets stripped out to make the file smaller when it is shared on most social media sites. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, they all strip out this data. But if an image file or a video file has been shared by, for example, a news organization, then it should have all of this data built in. And it shows things like what camera took the picture, what time it was taken, and so on. And this can typically be viewed by just clicking on, in this case, this is a screenshot from Apple's built-in image viewer. You can click on the info button and it shows all of this metadata. And in this example, which I love to use, it shows some official press photos released by the White House, which show Trump supposedly hard at work, even though he had COVID-19 at the time. But the image metadata reveals that these pictures, which show him in different rooms wearing slightly different clothes, were taken 15 minutes apart. They, were taken, in fact, 10 minutes apart if we look at the timestamp there and the timestamp there. This shows that, these weren't pictures that were taken of him hard at work. These were posed photographs taken as part of like a press release. So that kind of metadata can be really helpful if it's still attached to the image. Like I say, it'll be stripped out by almost all social media sites. This is what InVid looks like. If you download just one tool today, download InVid. It does basically all of the things that I have shown you today. Its image section does reverse image searches. Its video section lets you extract thumbnails and do a reverse image search for the thumbnails. It's got tutorials to teach you how to use it. It has advanced search functions built in. It can view metadata. All of those things are built into InVid. So check it out, follow those tutorials in your own time, and hopefully it'll lead you through some of these approaches. A comment about AI-generated images. AI-generated images like this one are totally fake. They aren't manipulated in Photoshop or something like that. They are built pixel by pixel by an artificial image generator. And they can be very deceptive. They can be very hard for a person to tell at first sight that they are not real images. And this can lead to harm and misinformation. As it becomes easier and the results become better quality, people are going to generate mis and disinformation using artificial intelligence. During elections, we've seen things like deep fakes, imitations of a person's voice or their image to make it look like they are saying or doing something that might be harmful to that image. Even outside of elections, this can be used to generate non-consensual sexual content. It can be used to scam people by imitating public figures or loved ones or other people that they trust and convincing them to give up personal data to those scammers. And then an indirect way that AI can cause harm is by introducing doubt. We call this the liar's dividend. When someone can point to a real image or video that they find inconvenient and use the power of AI to say, that's not me, that's not real, I never said something like that, that's just a fake video. We want to be careful to be able to spot AI, but without false positives, without calling real images and videos AI generated and introducing this sort of doubt. So how do we do this? You may have seen this image. It's a now pretty notorious AI-generated image, which appears to show Pope Francis wearing a big puffer jacket. There are still lots of clues in an image that give away that it is AI-generated. AI tends to make mistakes with especially small details. So just like when we looked at verifying images and videos earlier, and we talked about looking for small details that are not very obvious but can still give away where something was taken, here again, we are going to look for small details. I have a colleague that refers to these as inside clues and outside clues. Inside clues are things in the image that can give away that this is artificially generated. Things like accessories. If you saw in the close-up earlier of the Pope's glasses or his crucifix, they are similar to the ones he usually wears, but the glasses are distorted. The crucifix doesn't look like it actually does in real life. Backgrounds, body parts, patterns and textures, these are all things that are commonly gotten wrong or that have common errors in them. Small details like this object that he's holding in his hand, which doesn't make any sense. Often clothes have strange textures on them, or people have extra fingers or arms or something like that. These are all details that can still give away that an image is AI generated. And I recommend practicing at whichfaceisreal.com, which will show you an AI generated image next to a real image and ask you to guess which one is which. There are also outside clues that we can use. This means information from our general knowledge or from things that we can look up outside of what we see in the image. Things like, what is it trying to make you feel or think? Is there some kind of agenda to this image or some kind of aim that can give away that maybe there is a built-in bias here that should act as a red flag? What are reliable news sources saying? Are they confirming what this image shows, or do they contradict it? And a good example here is this image, which claims to show a mobile phone factory in Zambia. And there are lots of those inside clues. There are lots of strange details. There is bizarre, illegible text. This sort of line of people is very sort of, there's a very strong pattern here. They're sitting in the same pose. If we look closely, we could see strange details like sort of errors and visual noise in the components that they're assembling. But a much better way of disproving this image was just knowing from our outside knowledge that at the time this was posted, there were no mobile phone factories in Zambia. This couldn't have been a photograph taken inside a Zambian mobile phone factory because none existed at the time. And so that kind of outside knowledge can help give away that a photo or video is unreliable. I'm going to try and wrap up quickly. and I'm going to very quickly run through a final section of this before we do a quick Q&A. The final thing I'll say about AI-generated images is don't introduce that doubt by pointing at real things and claiming that they are AI-generated. It was very common when Photoshop started to become more and more convincing for people to point at real, genuine images and erroneously claim that they were Photoshopped. This is a joke about doing that and how it can be a little bit annoying. But as we saw earlier, this also introduces harm and doubt by allowing people to overestimate the power and deceptiveness of AI. The final thing, and I have included this so that you can have a look at the slides and the information that we've shared here in your own spare time. But I'm just going to very quickly run through how you can search for information online more effectively. The thing that I would focus on here is learning how to use advanced search tools and advanced search operators. Because of our time limitation, I'm just going to let you run through these slides in your own time. But I'll say for now that advanced searches are built into almost every search function online these days. They are built into most social media sites. They're built into Google and other major search engines, and they can allow you to narrow down the range of results that you receive from a search until hopefully you are doing your searches effectively enough that you just get 1 or 2 results and they are exactly what you're looking for. I have linked to a very useful blog which lists all of Google's advanced search operators. Some of them don't work anymore. Google tends to depreciate functions without necessarily announcing them. But going through these in your own time can help you find the ones that are most useful and relevant to your work, and just get to know how to use them. These are some common examples. You can do things like exclude terms from a search with a minus sign, or search for a specific site with a site and a colon, and then you have to put in the site URL, not the name. So if you search for site:africacheck.org, then you will find results that only come from the Africa Check website. Similarly, you can search for only a certain file type. So if you put in file type : PDF, and we're using the file extension there, the thing that's .pdf or .png, whatever appears at the end of a file name, that can help you find things that are likely to appear only in a specific file type. So studies and reports and press releases might be published in a PDF, whereas big tables full of data might be published as an Excel or spreadsheet file. And I would say combine all of these if you can. A combination of lots of different terms is likely to get you a very narrow range of results when you put together lots of these different advanced search operators. I am going to skip through these other examples just to say many sites have similar functions. Twitter, Facebook, although it is being depreciated at the end of the month, the site CrowdTangle, which lets you search Twitter and Instagram, sorry, not Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, has an advanced search function, and essentially all major search engines have some kind of advanced search function. If you use one of these sites regularly in your work, I recommend just looking up something like Facebook advanced search function and learning what kinds of things it can use and what kinds of advanced search functions are available to you. I have put in a very quick guide to Twitter's advanced search function with a couple of very useful examples, but it is something that is currently still available through a link on the, not Twitter anymore, X website. And you can just put in things into that advanced search function and see how they work. Another tool that you can use just to craft more effective searches is the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. which lets you search for how pages used to look on the web. Even if those pages have since been deleted or have since changed, then the Wayback Machine will let you see the older versions of those pages, as long as it has been saved by that Wayback Machine. Because we don't have time to cover all of these in more detail, although I would love to, I'm going to leave you to do those in your own time. And for now, I'm going to stop so that we can do our little Q&A and wrap up here. And if there's anything that I've covered so far that you have more questions about, hopefully you can ask about it now. And if you have questions for Bokamoso or Mabato about things like the awards, then please feel free to ask them those questions as well. Thank you, Salim, and thank you, Kepper, Akona, everyone who's saying that this was helpful. I'm very glad. I hope you take some time to check out these tools and get a little bit more practice with them in your own time, because as I say, just knowing a list of tools can be helpful, but if you get some practice applying these techniques and thinking about how to approach these kinds of problems, tracking down context or finding the original context in which something was posted, then that practice makes it easier and easier to do every time. Salima's asked, can we have a copy of the presentation? I've tried to, write out links and things like that and cite sources in a way that you can look up just from the text. So Mabato and Bokamoso will know whether this presentation will be shared anywhere, but at the very least, you should be able to use the recorded version of the presentation to at least look up those resources and visit those sites and find those tools. Bokamoso, you might know whether the actual slides are going to be shared at any point. Okay, yeah. Bokamoso has said that you should check out our YouTube page to rewatch the recording if you have missed anything or you'd like to go back over anything we've covered. Nelly Siwe asks if they have only done a module that includes journalism. They're doing a Bachelor of Arts in Media Communications and Culture. Would they still qualify to be in the competition? If you have something that was published in a student publication or something like that, even better if it was published in a newspaper or other news outlet, then absolutely you would qualify to enter into one of those categories. So you will be able to enter and you will be able to qualify. If you aren't specifically doing a journalism degree, but you are a student who has, published a fact check somewhere, then I believe that still counts. Great. I'm really glad that things seem to have been clear and helpful. If you do have any follow-up questions that come up later, it is relatively easy to get in touch with Africa Check. You can revisit this presentation, and you can always visit our website to find out more about the awards, to find out how to apply, and to be able to check those details, like when the cutoff date is, what the exact terms and conditions are, and how else you can apply. Bokamoso, you had something to add?
No, just what I have been saying in the chat, that the presentation and the recording will not be available, but they can obviously find it on our YouTube channel as it was live streamed. And then yeah, I think I'll close if no one has any further questions for Keegan or about the awards. And yeah, Mabato says we'll share the 5 steps to fact check poster after this webinar. So that is a part of the presentation that we will be sharing. Above and all, thank you all for joining us for today's insightful webinar. We hope you found the session rather informative and of course helpful in your journey to writing a fact check, to writing or publishing a fact check that will be entered in the awards. A special thank you to our speaker, Keegan Leach, for sharing his expertise and valuable tips. Your contribution is greatly appreciated. Also remember that the fight against misinformation is ongoing and your work as a fact checker is crucial. So keep striving for accuracy and excellence in your reports. And thank you once again for your participation. Have a great Friday and a great weekend. And of course, stay committed to the truth.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, BK. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining.